Nigar Luis, would you like me to share it, or do you want to share it? Does it make a difference?
It's up to you. If it's more comfortable for you to share yourself, then go for it.
Okay, so I'll share it from here. That is pretty wild. Okay.
I think that it might be an internal setting you might have to turn off, but I have no idea how to do it. I tried fiddling around, but I can't figure it out. So
That's too much. That is too much content on it. Right. Okay, let's do it. Very good. Okay, so we're in Chayei Sarah. Now, Shmuel, would you like to say something before I head into the Midrash that I chose that I would like someone to explain to me because I did not understand? So,
It's fine. Please start. Yeah, I suppose. Welcome. Sorry for my little delay. And yeah, Sarah is the parasha of this coming week. Basically, it starts with the Sarah's death, but it starts by saying that's how long Sarah lived. It goes through the burial, the funeral of Sarah, the buying of the burial plot for Sarah, and then the rest of the parasha, almost the whole parasha, discusses really the search for a bride for Avram's son, Yitzchak. But these midrashim that both Rabbi Kohn and myself have chosen are a little bit concentrating on specific verses or side points, which are not, perhaps, to anybody who thinks Parashat Chayei Sarah would not be such obvious subjects to concentrate on. Akasha.
good. So we start in Bereshit Rabbah, where he says, Rabbi Yehuda bar Shimon said, Abraham demanded aging. He said before him, so Abraham said before God, Master of the universe, a man and his son enter a place, and no one knows which of them to honor. A man and his son enter a place, and no one knows which of them to honor. Because you adorn him with aging, a person knows whom to honor. So seems to be saying that whenever someone is older than the other, or older, when someone has aged, I don't know if that's the same as being old, but when someone has aged, then it's easy to know who deserves honor. So God, blessed be he, said to Abraham, as you live, you have demanded a good thing, and it will begin with you. So God says to Abraham that, okay, this makes sense. Whatever you ask for makes sense. So I will start with you. Start with you. So then that seems to be saying that no one aged before Abraham did so. From the beginning of the book until that point, aging is not written. When Abraham stood, God granted Abraham aging, which is what we read in this week's parasha. Abraham was old. 24:1. We should see. Does anyone have any questions so far to the Midrash? No? Okay. So we read in Chayei Sarah ve'Avraham Zaken ba bayamim v'ad Hashem berach et Avraham bakol. Avraham was now old, advanced in years, and Hashem had blessed Avraham in all things. So this is what the Midrash is picking up on. And apparently it says the Midrash, before this time, no one else had been described as aging. But that's what we see Abraham. So Abraham had apparently asked for this. So God grants him aging. We continue with Yitzchak. Isaac demanded suffering. Isaac said before God, Master of the universe, a person dies without suffering. The attribute of justice is outstretched against him. When you bring suffering upon him, the attribute of justice is not outstretched against him. So God says to Yitzchak, as you live, you have demanded a good thing, and I will begin with you. From the beginning of the book until here, suffering is not written. When Yitzchak stood, he granted him suffering. How so? Because the Torah says, it was when Yitzchak was old and his eyes dimmed. So Isaac went blind, and that was his suffering. And no one apparently had suffered before Yitzchak. How does anyone, does this seem to ring true to anyone? Shmuel. Since no one responds, guys, Tikva, you have to unmute yourself and shout, and it's okay. So yes, we have Lancelot, Cecilia, and Ophelia.
Yes, so I was thinking about suffering. Well, maybe it's not the exact words, but in the story of Adam and Eve, God kind of says that you will have to work hard, and it is described in a sort of suffering way. So I guess people would have suffered earlier. I
Right.
think.
Yes, I would think so. One would have to have a very strange definition, I think, of suffering if Yitzchak is the first one to do so, with something that isn't necessarily a suffering. But I mean, people. We have a person who was killed by his brother. It would be strange to say that he didn't suffer. He was beaten to death. It's a bit strange to say that he didn't suffer. Like this is strange to me. So, which is why these Wednesday nights are so great, because then there's another rabbi that can provide me with the answer. Rav Shmuel, no pressure. What do you make of this so far? Now, I didn't warn you beforehand that I would put you on the spot, just so that I tell everyone this, okay? So I'm putting Rav Shmuel here on the spot. Any immediate thoughts about how could it be that the Midrash is saying that no one was old before Abraham and no one suffered before Yitzchak?
Yeah, I think historically, like you said, it's a bit difficult to accept the Midrash's claims at face value. I think the message is interesting, that's for sure. It means zikna, old age, is something that we would usually see as a weakness. Suffering, you would see it as a curse. And soon I'm going to get to Yaakov, and I can see illness. So the way I see it here is there is a certain value to these things. You know, old age gives a person respect. Suffering gives some sort of relief from justice. It's not very clear what the Midrash even means by that. That's what I study. You're thinking about how is this historically true? I'm trying to, without going into any question, how does this fit into the Torah or into history or into science? I'm just interested in how does the text make sense in itself? The attribute of justice is outstretched against him. Well, what does that mean? And if you suffer, what? That takes away your... I mean, there is a concept that if you suffer in this world, then you don't need to suffer in the next world. But is that what it means? It doesn't really say that. It just says that somehow there's an attribute of justice against you, and once you suffer, you get relief from it. So I'm not even sure what Yitzchak is actually asking for, or why is he asking for suffering, and what is suffering giving us? So yeah, I don't have an answer to you. I just ended up coming up with more questions.
That's good. Yes, Lancelot, Cecilia.
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything to really add, but I just looked quickly. Now this is the English translation, so you will have to correct me if the Hebrew is different. But I was thinking about when Hashem curses Adam and Eve, and he actually says, just let me find the exact wording here. Yeah, to the woman he said, I will increase your suffering and the difficulty of your pregnancy. So it actually says suffering, at least in the English translation, but maybe it's a
Yeah.
different word in Hebrew. I don't know. But also if it says increase your suffering, that would imply that suffering already exists, and maybe even in the suffering was already a part of
Yeah,
pregnancy. But this
absolutely.
would
So
increase it.
I agree with you and Shmuel that I think I don't think that the Midrash or God actually thinks that any of these people invented, and I don't think Abraham thought that he was the first person to become old either, and I don't think Yitzchak was the first person. He knows that he wasn't the first person, right, to suffer. So this we can exclude as I think an interpretive option. So what does it mean? Good. So now we started thinking about this a bit more closely. We were even gifted a parallel source by Lancelot. That's great interpretive work to find sources or the same word in a different story. That's a good way of interpreting. So Yaakov demanded illness. We continue in the Midrash. He said before him, so Yaakov said before God, please, God, a person dies without illness and does not settle matters between his children. When he is ill for 2 or 3 days, he settles matters between his children. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to Yaakov, as you live, you have demanded a good thing, and it will begin with you. One said to Yosef, behold, your father is ill. So here we do get this idea that where we find in the Torah that he becomes ill. Now, is he the first person to become ill? I think that would be silly to think. So someone wants the link again. No problem. So Abraham wasn't the first person to be old. Yaakov wasn't the first person to become ill, and Yitzchak wasn't the first person to suffer. So here is at least one. I just want to finish. Sorry, we want to finish the Midrash, and then I'll give an attempt to answer. Rabbi Levi said, Abraham introduced aging, Yitzchak introduced suffering, Yaakov introduced illness. So here, even if you were wondering how strange this Midrash is, so Rabbi Levi just comes to confirm, yeah, it's just as strange as you thought it was, and all these people invented these 3 things. And Chizkiah introduced illness that is cured. He said to him, you would sustain one until the day of his death, but because the person is ill and recovers, he repents. God blessed Chizkiah and said, as you live, you have demanded a good thing. That's what is written, a composition of Chizkiah, king of Judah, when he became ill and recovered from his illness. Rav Shmuel bar Nachman said, from here we learn that between illness and illness, there was an illness that was more severe than both of them. Okay, the last part I don't think is really that relevant for the Midrash. Here is where I think we can find a way to explain the Midrash. Yaakov says, Yaakov is the only one that gives a reason for why he wants what he asks for. He asks for illness before he dies, because if one is ill, says Yaakov, no, God says so. Said before him, master of the right. Yeah, you're right. Yaakov says to God that if I become ill before I die, I will be able to settle matters between my kids. That's why he asks for illness. So I don't think that the Midrash really says that these people invented these things. And I don't think Abraham thought that he invented aging. And Yaakov didn't think that he invented illness. But what Yaakov is really inventing is an illness before death as an instrument in order to use it for something good. So he wants illness before he dies in order to achieve something that he couldn't do if he didn't become ill before he died. So, and he says, some sort of a new development in human understanding. Yeah, yes, absolutely. Some sort of new understanding of the reality that everyone already lives in. So all of them already lives in a reality where people become ill. That's common fact. And more often back then, if you became ill, it meant that you would die. So that was already the case. But what Yaakov was, I think the Midrash is saying, that Yaakov understood that, well, if I become ill before I die, I can actually use it as an instrument for something good in my life. So if we continue down this path of the interpretation, I think we might see something similar with Avraham. Avraham zaken baba yamim, v'Hashem berachet Avraham bakol. Avraham was now old, advanced in years, and God had blessed Avraham in all things. And he was advanced in years. So here the Torah is making a point out of Avraham's age. The Torah says, Avraham is old. And then the Torah says, Ba bayamim, he was advanced in years. Now, if someone goes on and says, this person is old, this person is really old, this person has lived for a long time. Like at some point you say, okay, fine, I get it. Like you don't have to rub it in. Okay, this is a very old person. Okay, I understand. So that's what the Torah is doing here. The Torah is sort of pointing out several times that Avraham is really old. but why is that necessary? So is this expression here, which is fascinating, Ba Bayamim, means that he came into his years. What does it mean, Rav Shmuel? What does it mean to come into your years or into your days? Ba Bayamim, came into. So here it's beautifully translated as Ba Bayamim, is beautifully translated as advanced in years. And I'm wondering, so we also have advanced in days, which what's it called? Translate this more literally, Yamim, or Kohn says advanced in age. So Kohn says Avraham was old, advanced in age. So okay, fine, we get it. You're seemingly just repeating something, but I think it's saying something else. Yes, Nigar.
I just had a question. Wasn't this also kind of mentioned last week? Because we learned about the covenant that Avraham made with God, and then I think it was a very big deal that he was very, very old.
Right.
He was very.
It was made a big deal about being old because of having children, right?
Yeah, but I'm not sure if it's related to this week's portion as well with the same kind of meaning, or just had a thought, so I wanted to ask.
Very good. And I think so. First of all, compared to the other people that we hear the numbers of, Avraham wasn't that old. So if you compare it in terms of years, Avraham was a very, very young child compared to Noah and compared to Adam, right? So that's also why I think it means something else. I would say, I would suggest this, and then we will go over to we'll hear if Rav Shmuel agrees. I think it's telling us something about how Avraham aged, not that he is so old. which is also not very interesting. Meaning, so fine, we understand that he was an old man, but more than that, he was advanced in years, or he came into his days. I think that Torah is trying to tell us that he became old in a way that made him, according to the Midrash, it made him deserving of honor. I don't think normally we don't think or say that maybe because the Parashat Chaye Sarah talks about the life of Sarah. Wait, you have to help me here, Tikva. Is there? So because it talks about the life of Sarah, then I didn't understand the connection fully, so you have to help me. But what I think is, so I don't think that we necessarily, yes, we in a sense we have some sort of respect and honor to people who are old, but I think that we have even greater respect for the people who have done something with their life over a long period of time, and I think that's what the Torah is talking about. When you come into your days, when you have advanced into your years, I think the Torah is sort of telling us that Avraham is the first person not only to live for a long time. Yes, he lived for a long time, but he spent his life doing something that when he became older, he deserved honor. So Avraham asks to be old because he wants to be honored. And I think the Torah, I think the Midrash is picking up this idea that, well, yes, Avraham is not the first person to be old, but he is the first person to use his life in a sense that gives this life the purpose that makes it deserve to be honored. And when Yitzchak says that he wants suffering, and the Midrash says he's the first person to ever suffer, Yitzchak invented suffering, I think the Midrash is saying something similar, that it was the way that Yitzchak suffered, which was new to the world. Someone said in the chat that it was a new reality of some sort. And I think that's sort of how I read this Midrash, that and he said that some sort of a new development in human understanding. And I think the new thing here, the invention, is that you use your understanding about the reality in a way is new. Your understanding of suffering, Yitzchak understood the suffering in a way that other people hadn't understood it beforehand. Avraham understood life in a way that he used his years in a way that people hadn't used them before. His time was used in a different way. And when Yaakov, he asked for illness, Yaakov used his illness before he died in a different way than people have done it before him. So in that sense, he invented a new human understanding to illness before death, terminal illness as we call it. And in this sense, I think maybe Rabbi Levi says that Avraham introduced aging, Yitzchak introduced suffering, and Yaakov introduced illness. And with this, I would like to introduce Rav Shmuel's Midrash, also from Bereshit Rabbah. Rav Shmuel, would you like to read it in Hebrew first or in English, or?
I think English is fine. It's a longer piece, and it's very much a continuation of what Michael was talking about here. That I think we get a lot into what was Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov's teaching, but I think what the common denominator is that we're looking at the end of life, or the latter part of life, in a very positive perspective. Yeah, aging, suffering, even illness can be turned into positive strengths, and I think this is not such a common idea in modern Western society. People are running after after youth, after being young, and people are almost ashamed to admit that they're a bit older already. So I think here it comes up very strongly. Jewish person is not like that. And this Midrash maybe is moving on to saying, well, what can a person do when they're old? Before we enter the Midrash, it's important to understand how is this Midrash coming up? It's actually coming here towards the end of the parasha. I told you that the parasha discusses the burial of Sarah. It discusses the search for a wife for Yitzchak. When there's just the last few paragraphs that not many people pay any attention to, where Abraham, after all of this, gets married again to Keturah, which Rashi says it was Hagar, some say it was somebody else, but he gets married again and has another few children. Which is, of course, very interesting, very surprising, very anticlimactic, because you would imagine after this whole story is over, because if it was a made-up drama, the climax is the old man dies and his children continue. But actually, that's not what happens in Torah. Abraham got married again after Yitzchak got married and had another few children, which we know very little about. So this idea comes out of this Midrash. In the morning sow your seed, and in the evening do not rest your hand. Rabbi Eliezer of Yeshua.
Sorry, hang on.
Oh, sorry. If you sowed in the early season, sow in the late season as well, as you do not know which will succeed, whether that of the early season or that of the late season, or whether they both alike will be good. So we're playing here we're explaining a verse in the book of Kohelet, or Ecclesiastes, as it's been translated here in posh English, which is a book of the thoughts of King Solomon, Shlomo Melech, about the meaning of life, advice. And one of the verses there is, in the morning sow your seed, in the evening do not rest your hand. So first, Rabbi Eliezer interprets it in a very quite literal sense. Well, what is this sowing your seed? If you're a farmer, so there's different seasons of planting. So if you sow in the early season, sow again in the late season, because you don't know which one will succeed. At different seasons, at different opportunities, the climate is different, the land is different, whatever there is, try again. Don't put sounds almost like a business advice. Don't put all your all your eggs in one bag. You don't know which crop is the best. You don't know what's the best time to plant. So try different options. Rabbi Yeshua said, if a poor person comes to you in the morning, give him charity. And if another comes in the evening, give him as well. As you do not know for which of them the Holy One, blessed be He, will record about you. For this one or for that one, or whether they both alike will be good. Okay. Now Rabbi Yeshua is taking this to the same concept to a more general and more abstract level. Forget about seas, forget about fields. We're talking about a mitzvah. Mitzvah of helping another person. So if somebody came in the morning, don't say, okay, I did the mitzvah this morning, I've given tzedakah. No. Somebody else comes in the evening, give tzedakah, and you don't know which mitzvah will be more valuable in God's eyes. And this is actually very interesting. First of all, I find it fascinating. Why should there be a difference? Why should God value the tzedakah that you give in the morning more than the one you give in the evening? Yeah. Are the amounts different? Are you giving more in the evening? Are you perhaps smiling more to this person? Have you got purer intentions? Text doesn't say, but every mitzvah is precious, and you shouldn't think I've done a mitzvah, I'm good. Okay, Rabbi Akiva said if you had students in your youth, procure students for yourself in your old age as well, as you don't know which of them will endure, this one or that one, or whether they both alike will be good. Now Rabbi Akiva takes this idea of seeds, and I think it sounds like Midrash is sort of playing the whole time with the same idea. First, it was actual literal seeds in the ground. Then it was giving money to a poor person, which is also, I suppose, in some ways planting a seed of a mitzvah, especially if the poor person does something positive with the money and looks after himself. Now Rabbi Akiva is looking at the seed is the words of Torah. You have your students, you have your Talmidim, and you teach them. And he says something interesting. You had a lot of students when you were young, and then you continue. Don't retire from the teaching. Interesting advice. And nowadays, a lot of talk about retirement age and what's the right retirement age. And sometimes I have even people who don't want to retire, but they're encouraged to retire. Rabbi Akiva says, if you know how to teach and you've been given that gift, and you've taught many students, don't stop, because you don't know. It might be the best students might be yet to come, and it's a pity for them not to have your teaching. And this was not just Rabbi Akiva's advice. Look at how this was actually part of his own life. Rabbi Akiva had 12,000 students from Akko to Antipatris, and they all died in one time period. Why? Because they were miserly towards one another. Yeah, so this is the famous story of the Omer. That's why many people have accustomed not to do certain signs of mourning during the Sfirat HaOmer between Pesach and Shavuot, or Pesach and Lag BaOmer, depending on your community. And either don't cut hair and beard, or don't listen to music, or all sorts of different, not to perform weddings. So this story is a well-known Talmudic story. So Rabbi Akiva, in short, that's what happened. He had a lot of students, they all died. So really, you could say to a certain extent, all the teaching he did it was a mitzvah, but it didn't produce fruit. It wasn't a seed that produced fruit. There was no future. Nothing came out of this teaching for the future of the Jewish people. Ultimately, he produced 7 disciples: Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua, Rabbi Yochanan Sandelag, and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Some say Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Nehemiah, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, Rabbi Chanan ben Chachina, and Rabbi Yochanan Sandelag. Okay, so different versions here. He said to them, my sons, the previous students died only because they were miserly towards one another. See to it that you do not act in accordance with their actions. They arose and filled the entire land of Israel with Torah and knowledge. So I think there's 2 points in this one. Because first of all, there's the fact that they died. So obviously, if Rabbi Akiva would have said, okay, I'm retiring now, so there would not have been any Torah in the Jewish people because all these students died. So the fact that he decided to continue teaching in his old age actually saved the Jewish people, which is a pretty important historical point. But I think there's something else here. He keeps stressing the fact, why did they die? Why did this punishment come to them? Because they were disrespectful, as they translate here, miserly towards one another, whatever that means. But the idea is they had some lack of midot, that lack of good character traits at their level. It wasn't as much as was expected from the Torah scholar in that time. I think that's also interesting because that plays into the Midrash, right? Because you don't know, like the verse says, you don't know if this is good or that is good. So you don't know who are going to be the good students who actually are going to absorb your teachings. I think it's also important to remember who is Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is the man who said, love your fellow as yourself. This is the important principle of the Torah. So he's the man of loving your fellow as yourself. That was his motto in life. Yeah, he's the one who kept quoting that verse in the Torah. So it seems to be that the first 12,000 students didn't completely, at least, absorb this teaching, whereas these last 7 did. And then Rabbi Dostai and Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman. If you had children in your youth, take a wife in your old age and produce more children. From whom do you learn this? From Abraham, who had children in his youth and took a wife in his old age and produced more children. This is what is written. Abraham took another wife. Yeah, so this is maybe for many readers less comfortable. I don't know how people feel about the idea of an elderly person marrying a younger woman who has capability of having more children and producing again more children. But again, obviously, every situation is different. But I think the message is very interesting. People who, for whatever reason, yeah, it could be that their spouse died, it could be that they divorced, could be all sorts of reasons, and they end up starting a family a second time all over again. So the way I see it, the message here is don't belittle this new situation, don't belittle this new opportunity. Perhaps it is the next children in this new family that you've started. Maybe these are the real children that are really going to make a difference in this world. So I like this midrash because it's using the same idea from many different perspectives. Eventually coming to Abraham, who remarried at an old age, but the same idea that don't think, okay, in English people use the expression my best years. I spent my best years in university, or I spent my best years touring the world. And I never liked this expression because I'm not even sure what people mean by it. Is your best years when you're 20 or when you're 30, or I'm not sure what it means by best years. But it's not a good expression because who knows what are your best years? Maybe they're ahead, maybe they're behind. Only God knows, and you don't even know how long is your life going to be. So try to use every moment in your life as if these are your best years. That's just what I get out of this midrash. But I would really like to hear what Rabbi Kohn has any ideas, and if the audience or the other members of the midrash have any ideas. I can see Tikva Shira has already got an idea, so I would like to hear what have you got to say.
Yes, because I want to comment about, because the parasha talks about the death of Sarah, but the name of the parasha is Hayei Sarah. It means the life of Sarah, who want to explain that Sarah have life a lot of wisdom and kindness, and he lives a wonderful life in Hashem, and the parasha want to reflect that she was a woman of good life, wisdom, and all things. Yes, she lives 127, if I remember. So it's included. Hayei Sarah means that the lives of Sarah. It means that all the years that was full of wisdom and all. This is my comment.
Very good. Yeah. Definitely, there is. At the moment of death, you can see so you get a new perspective on the life, and I once there's an interest. I don't remember if it's a midrash or Gemara. There's this idea that we usually celebrate when a baby is born and we're sad when a person dies, but actually you could look at it the opposite way. When a baby is born, you have no idea what will come out from his life. We don't know. At death, that's a moment when there are achievements that you can sort of celebrate and be grateful for. Interesting. Julia Stein, please. You're muted. Julia Stein? Hello? You're muted. Okay. Okay. Rabbi Kohn, would you like to say something?
I thought this was even more complicated than mine. This was... I just like that Rabbi Akiva is like the best thing he can think of is having students. Like, that's sort of his the dream scenario is that well, if that's what you would do, then you should have them as old as well. But yeah, I think I see the reading the way you did as well, and I would interpret this the same way.
Sorry, my WhatsApp was jammed before, but I have this your idea about being old. I have a practical application of this idea. Is that I worked for a long time with the elderly, and you can see that there is like what we were taught in school, that when people are elderly, that the life should be meaningful. And that's what we try to, when we work with the elderly, that's what we try to make their life to be, that they have some nice experiences and like they can actually do something meaningful with their life. And it's kind of impractical, that corresponds with this week's teaching. I don't know how to say it in nice words.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a very important message in the Torah and in general. Pauline?
Well, I have a reflection like about both texts, because what you keep on mentioning is like, oh, when somebody is older, we think certain way, or if somebody has been married once and then marries twice, maybe older, then we think a certain way, and so on. And for me, because me myself, I have a problem of judgmental way of thinking in the society. I think this text they challenges like the regular way we think about how life should look like, and it goes into like a deeper understanding of like, do not judge persons' decisions and so on, because their motivations can be different, as for example like getting married again at older age and getting children. So I think it's like a lot of like shallow judgment that people get in the world for example doing that, and I just don't feel like it's right. And I think this is like what you mentioned a few times. So I just wanted to add that reflection right now.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to learn from the Chachamim, and it's very interesting how they wrote this thousands of years ago when people might have had all sorts of judgments on these matters as well.
Yeah, I don't think the first one is really judging anyone, but I do think that it's telling us about ways to things that are ideal, and then of course there are reasons why people might not do that, which might be perfectly acceptable, but they might also not be. I think that's sort of what. So when we say that Abraham aged in a way that people didn't do before him, so then I think the Torah is saying, I don't think it's judging it. The Midrash, I don't think Midrash is judging anyone, but I do think it's saying that there is an ideal way of living your life before you get that old, and the way to live that life is by using it wisely and using your time wisely, and in that sense, sort of using the expression advancing into your years. And then of course there can be different reasons for why one might not be, which I think is true for most of us at least, which at least personally speaking, there are times when you certainly feel like, okay, I'm not really using my time the way that I should. And then there can be good or not so good reasons for why you would do that. And that's completely, with that, I absolutely agree with you, Pauline. But yeah, I think that the Midrash is at least saying that there is some sort of ideal that we can discuss, and then there might be reasons for why we won't reach the ideal at certain times. But yeah, certainly, very good.
think it's also interesting the beginning part, or the idea sort of, sow your seed in the ground, but then do it again at another time. Yeah, I'm not an expert in agriculture, but it sounds a bit like try to do your best, use all the opportunities you're given, because things might not turn out the way you think they're going to turn out. And sometimes a person has an amazing plan. This is what I'm going to do, but your plan might or it might not work. So if God gives you different opportunities, different possibilities in life, then use all of them, because you don't know which one is the main one. That's I think an important message for a lot of often ambitious people have a plan, so to say.
Right.
A person sort of has to have a plan B as well. A person has to be realistic in this world, and things might not happen exactly the way you want. I just thought, to me, it sounded quite interesting also, because in the traditional, usually when you think of faith and religion, you think about, trust in God, you believe in God, and it's, of course, that is essential and important, but what you think God wants might not be what God really wants, and he might want something else from you than you thought. And it comes in marriage, it can come in teaching Torah, like we said, it can come in business, it can come in many forms and situations. And the really important thing that God wanted from you might be something completely different than what you imagined it to be.
Right. I think the one thing Pauline said, which resonates with me very much, which is why I sort of focused, or I spoke more about the Yaakov and Avraham than I did about Yitzchak, and that is the one where I think the Midrash is saying, or at least it can say, that there is a way to that there's a way to suffer which is better than others, or that the suffering can be instrumental in some way or another, that there's a way to use it for something which is positive, and that I find very I find that uncomfortable, to especially for someone. I haven't, Baruch Hashem, experienced a tragedy the way many others have, and the way I probably will at some point in my life, closely on my body, like many others have. And I think that therefore I try to be I try not to hint at ways to use suffering as an instrument, and that there are better ways to suffer than others, or that some people are suffering better, or some people are stronger than others. And the way that Midrash seems to say, I think, is what Pauline is picking up on, is that, well, Yitzchak seems to be suffering, using his suffering for the first time in a way that is somehow for the positive. And I think that makes me uncomfortable, and that's sort of what I, in some sense, heard Pauline saying, that we should be extremely, especially maybe when it comes to suffering, one should be extremely careful trying to hint at some people suffering better or being stronger than others. And this we hear all the time, not just from our religious writings, but also in our secular societies. We hear people who claim that some people are being strong, or some people in their suffering, and that hints at some other people not being strong. Or if you do it differently than the people who are strong, well, what are those people? Are those people not strong then, if they're doing something different than the people you are referring to as strong who is suffering? So I think that's one area where I think it is particularly important that we withhold judgment, but maybe not only withholding judgment, but also being careful about the positive attributes and characteristics that we are placing on people's experiences, right? Because that might say something implicitly about the people who are doing it differently. So that's the one area, that's the one part of the Midrash that made me feel unease and uncomfortable, because it sort of praised Yitzchak the way he was dealing with the suffering, which easily can make us think that the people who are dealing with it differently might not be doing it in a good way. But yeah. Good. People, it's a pleasure learning with you whenever I get the chance on Wednesdays. Thank you very much for your attention. Rav Shmuel, thank you very much for your insight.
Thank you very much, everyone.
And everyone, Tiskul Mitzvot, sei gesund,
All the best.
and have a great Shabbat.
Laila
Oh, yeah.
Shalom.
Tov.